As this is the Honourable Jan Barham's inaugural speech, I would ask honourable members to extend to her the usual courtesies. The Honourable Jan Barham.
Mr President, I acknowledge that this Parliament is on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I offer my respect to the Elders past, present and future. I acknowledge that I'm from Bundjalung Nation and the land of the Inaugural people, and pay my respect to those Elders past and present, and the community I am proud to work with and call friends. I rise to speak in the House today for the first time as one of 6 Green members of the New South Wales Parliament, and I acknowledge those Green members who have served me before. I congratulate all who sit in this House. I've been privileged to work with my local Aboriginal community for over 15 years. Since 1994, I've had a close association with the Inaugural and worked in support of the long process that has led to the completion of 3 Indigenous land use agreements. I congratulate the former government and particularly Premiers Carr and Yama and Minister Debus for their commitment to the outcomes. I also acknowledge the long-term commitment of Ian Cohen. He gave his word to support the Elders in 1994 and did. In 2007, I was honoured to be asked to officiate an event at the Cape Byron Headland where Premier Ayama acknowledged the finalisation of the Indigenous Land Use Agreements Stage 2 and 3 that advanced the negotiations with the state government. These have achieved the return of land to the Inaugural to secure their original house site, a site for a cultural centre and the ownership of a caravan park that will provide ongoing economic security. These outcomes were in addition to the delivery of the Inaugural National Park in Inaugural Stage 1 that created the protection of significant coastal lands just south of the Cape Byron Headland and also created jobs that now have provided a working on country experience for over 15 people. The jobs creation was a priority for the Elders as they knew that education and employment is the key to providing a more secure future for Aboriginal people. I sit as a community representative on the advisory board that was created for the joint management of the National Park. I've held this position since its establishment, and I would like to make mention of the experience that was provided to me as a member of the board by way of cultural awareness training. I believe this is an exercise that would benefit many in society as a means to understand the Indigenous experience. The delivery of these agreements highlights how the state government can take significant action to recognise Aboriginal people and improve the lives of the First Peoples of this country. I'm now very proud to be the Green spokesperson for Aboriginal Affairs and look forward to learning more and offering my support to groups across the state. I'm honoured to stand here as a representative of the Greens, having been a member for almost 20 years. I joined the Greens because they represented a worldview, a global set of principles that define a better future, that later was encapsulated by the early slogan for the Greens New South Wales, "Our future, vote Green." The Greens are often misunderstood, as many take the colour as a representation of only the natural world rather than of life itself. All aspects of life and society are our responsibility. Hence the 4 principles of peace and non-violence, social and economic justice, ecological sustainability and grassroots democracy. It's a political organisation that reflects my ideals, and I'm proud to have been involved in the early campaigns and policy development. I've been a candidate in local, state and federal elections since 1997 and was elected to Byron Shire Council in 1999. In 2002 I became Deputy Mayor, and in 2004 became Australia's first popularly elected Green Mayor. In 2008 I was re-elected as Mayor. I'm from the country, the far north coast. I've lived there for over 20 years, but I grew up in Wollongong, in an area to the south, a suburb called Unanderra. I went to public schools and after matriculation moved to Newcastle to attend the university. But this didn't suit me, and I found myself spending more time in architecture lectures and at art school. Growing up in Wollongong was an education in itself. It was a multicultural area, and I watched people who lived in garage spend their weekends building their homes. And I spent time in my neighbourhood learning of the world as I was invited into the homes of diverse backgrounds where cultural heritage was on display and the food, art and practices were shared generously. I innocently thought the world was like this, a multicultural melting pot. Later I was shocked at the lack of tolerance for others that was also a part of the Australian culture. The industries that defined the area were mining and the steelworks. I was exposed to the fact that some fathers went to work and never came home. In the 1960s, their deaths in the mines caused months of strikes in an effort to improve workplace conditions. I remember going to school and finding additional sandwiches in my bag. They were for sharing with those who didn't have much. But nothing was said about this, it just happened. I also remember the shock of the fortnightly pay night when fathers staggered up the road late at night from the Leeds Club at the bottom of my street. My bedroom faced the road, and after being woken by the drunken rabble, I watched the shadow play of violence behind the curtains across the road. The next morning I saw the women appear from the homes wearing large 60s sunglasses and the kids at schools with bruises announcing that Dad had put all the pay packet in the pokies. This was not my family situation. I was lucky. My family was quiet. My mother baked biscuits, loved to flower garden, and cooked the food that my father grew in our backyard garden and the chook pen. Neighbours swapped their produce, and I remember when new arrivals from Italy moved next door, they brought us a grapevine cutting that was planted on the adjoining fence and still grows there. This has instilled me with a love of gardening and encouragement for local food production. My childhood was also about exploring nature, being able to go on long hikes in the bush and horse riding with friends. My parents were from the South Coast. My father from a Jasper's Brush dairying family, my mother from Berry, where her father had his final posting as a policeman after being a country sergeant in many rural New South Wales towns. It was from him that I heard about my current home, when he referred to it as God's own country, from his time stationed in Bangalore in the 1920s. He also spoke often of the important role of caring for community. We used to spend holidays at the farm, and I was taught to knit and sew by my grandmothers. I fondly remember nights of family gatherings around the radio, time spent together with busy hands making what was needed and mending what was worn. It was the foundation of my green ideals, the self-sufficiency and the commitment to recycling and valuing what resources were available. There was always a ball of string and hand-me-downs and the making of preserves to take advantage of abundant seasonal produce. I'm TAFE educated with 2 trade certificates. I did 2 years study at Wollongong TAFE and then won a statewide scholarship to attend East Sydney Tech, where I finished my studies. When I completed my course, I did work experience with a fashion company for a month and was then offered a full-time job. I worked in the fashion industry in Sydney for 8 years prior to moving to the North Coast in 1989 to live part-time, still returning to Sydney to do short-term, intense bursts of work. It was a hard industry, non-unionised and tough, but I learnt valuable lessons in business and efficiency. I left the city in pursuit of a more meaningful life in a small community. When I arrived in Byron Bay, I headed to the library to research the local area and understand its history, and I talked to many people to hear of the stories of life in a small regional town. I joined local environment organisations and started to come to grips with the struggle between development and the protection of our natural and cultural heritage. This was spurred by my awareness in the 80s of environmental concerns, most notably the Franklin, the Daintree, North Coast rainforests, uranium mining and the green bans in Sydney. The history of the Australian environment movement is one we can all be proud of. We have forged a radical, typically Australian, larrikin and theatrical movement that pioneered on a global stage. Many of our songs and images have travelled the world inspiring others. And it was the meeting between Jack Mundy that inspired Petra Kelly on a visit to Australia to take back the ideas to Germany and establish the Green Party. We then adopted the German political structure and principles, and in 1991, Bob Brown, along with Ian Cohen and others, established the Australian Greens in North Sydney. I was inspired by the courage, the vision, and the creative pursuits of the campaigners. It made me aware that we collectively have a responsibility to protect the world we live in and ensure it's available for future generations. My move to the North Coast was not just a whim. It was in part a response to the death of a close friend that set me thinking on the meaning of life, hence my desire to find greater purpose beyond work and the fast lane. As it turned out, on my arrival in Byron was at the same time as the move by the multinational tourism organisation Club Med. With state government support and the Council of the Day giving approval for a resort, the town of Byron Bay was headed for a change of identity. But it wasn't accepted. And the environmental organisation of which I was a member set about assessing the development and investigating the options to oppose. It was broad community opposition that brought businesses together with conservationists, and the Byron Shire Businesses for the Future was formed. I was secretary of that organisation and was committed to legally challenging the approval by the council, and we were ultimately successful in the Land and Environment Court. The Byron Shire community has a reputation for being outspoken, and their voice is heard because it has the megaphone of independent media. The Byron Shire Echo this year celebrates 25 years of publication, and this combined with the community radio station Bay FM meant that the power to communicate is unfettered. It's one place where the main means of communication is not in the hands of the corporates. I spent a number of years working on environmental court cases, including a quarry in a coastal area of high ecological significance. The Batson's Quarry and Club Med cases both failed on the basis of inadequate environmental assessments. I learnt about the legal system through my work on these cases from the ground up. This is what inspired me to become involved in politics, to change the inappropriate laws. After 10 years living and working in Sydney in the 80s, my move to the country was a conscious choice to seek a life of voluntary simplicity, some referring to it as dropping out, but I saw it as a process of seeking more. Life in the city sets up a way of thinking that was soon changed when I moved to the country. I didn't have a driver's licence, as in the city there were so many options for travel. When I moved to the North Coast, I was shocked to learn that public transport was virtually non-existent. I wanted to work, and an opportunity to teach at the TAFE in Lismore was thwarted by the fact that to teach for 4 hours, I was going to involve catching a 7 a.m. bus from Byron Bay and returning at 7:15 that evening. Thankfully, I was able to work independently due to the skills I had from my trade training. There exists a disadvantage for people in the regions if transport is not seen as a priority. Next week is the 7th anniversary of the removal of the North Coast train service. At a time when an increase in the provision of service for a growing regional community was needed, a vital service was taken away. We hope to see the new government reconsider this issue. So Bring Back the Train has been a uniting position from the North Coast community, and I acknowledge the inquiry into the closure of the casino to Murwillumbah Rail, chaired by the Honourable Jenny Gardner, that identified the issues and provided insights into the community need for the service. The inquiry brought the Parliament to the people. Public transport is a key focus for not only the North Coast but other regions, as it is an essential service that affects every aspect of daily life and plays a part in determining a community's access to work, education, health, recreation and community involvement. I can relate a dire situation where a local woman with breast cancer made the decision to have a mastectomy rather than undergo the ongoing treatment after less invasive surgery. She made the decision as she was unable to travel for treatment due to the lack of medical services and the lack of effective transport options. This is only one example of where the limitations of basic services has a dramatic effect on people's lives. I have experienced exceptional moments with courageous, caring people, from the Aboriginal people of the Bundjalung Nation to the fifth-generation dairy farmers, the CWA women, of which I am a proud member of the Bangalore branch, the many volunteers who give their time in caring to others, the brave work of the SES, the bushfires, surf life saving and emergency rescue volunteers. And as this week is National Volunteer Week, it's important to note the work of volunteers, and particularly in rural and regional areas, where there are distances between services and the need for localised resilience is so vital to the functioning of small communities. I believe the functioning of society as we know it would stop if it wasn't for volunteers, and governments would never be able to pay for the valuable contribution. So we should value them highly and ensure we do whatever we can to ease some of the burdens that make it difficult for them to function. When I do citizenship ceremonies or meet newcomers in my area, I always make mention of volunteering and advise people it's a great way to meet your community and to gain insight. There is such a wide choice of activities that it means that people can choose an existing interest or skill-based area or venture into a new area. I thank my parents for giving me the principles of honesty and integrity. And as my mother said when some felt I'd lost my way with leaving a career to search for a purposeful life in a small community, she's just like her grandparents, quite old-fashioned. My mother, Norma Barham, and my sister, Linda Kennedy, were here for my swearing-in last week and were very proud. My family has always supported me, despite not always understanding me. My late father was a public servant at Tallawarra Power Station and would never help me with my schoolwork. He always told me that the only way to learn was to do it myself and to always question everything, as decisions are what we live with. My brother Ray is not a fan of my beliefs. He worked as a railway electrical fitter his whole life and is a shooter and an archer. But I know he is always there for me. I worked in this place 95 to 99 with Ian Cohen. And after working here and witnessing some important changes made to legislation to protect and preserve the environment, to enshrine ecological sustainable development in the Local Government Act, I felt positive about the challenge of local government. In 1999, I was elected to Byron Shire Council to join fellow Green Councillor Richard Staples. It was a steep learning curve in not only the complex processes of local government, but also the harsh reality of the constraints on service delivery. In 2002, a by-election saw the election of two more Green councillors, Sandra Halpin and Duncan Day, which resulted in the Greens having 4 out of 10 members on council. In 2004, with the general election, the Greens were successful in retaining the 4 representatives, with the re-election of myself, Councillor Staples, but also Tom Tabart and John Lazarus. In the 2008 election, again, 4 Green members were elected, with Councillor Staples, Tabart and myself re-elected, and the welcoming of a new Green councillor, Simon Richardson. This was at a time when the council was made up of 9 councillors. I would like note to be taken that by no means could it be said that 4 out of 10 or even 4 out of 9 constitutes a majority of elected representatives. But this has been the mantra of the detractors and some of the media in relation to Byron Shire Council, a Green-dominated council, if only, I say. I've spent many years on committees and in difficult decision-making on the issue of coastal management and have relied on some clear guidelines for consideration of impact that were set down by the state government in the 1980s. It appears that the challenge for this government will be how they deal with climate change and its impacts and whether or not it respects scientific advice. I'm an art advocate and appreciate the expression of who we are as a society. Art portrays our experiences and shares them. It's often popular culture that tackles the controversial political issues of the day in a meaningful way for the people and can define the political awareness. I'm very pleased to be representing the arts on behalf of the Greens. I'm a feminist and a defender of the disadvantaged. I believe we have a responsibility in a civil society to protect those in need, and we face huge challenges for the future. I'm here because I believe in democracy and the responsibility of being an elected member to serve the people. I know that many people criticise our democracy, but there isn't a system any better. Perhaps we just have to accept that we are the problem, not the process. It saddens me that there has been a loss of respect for the role of the Parliament and those who serve. I believe we have a responsibility to deliver good governance by seeking broad and expansive advice and evidence. I look forward to hearing the divergent views and am respectful of difference and delighted if my views can be further informed by others' perspectives. I believe in intergenerational equity and the precautionary principle as guides to good governance. I'm here as a realist but also an optimist. I hope that we can work together to deliver good decisions and return to the people of New South Wales trust in this democratic process. Thank you.
Lynn, I think let's leave the chair now because we're going to be on the just that Hats is speaking at 6 o'clock, and Peter was going to suggest leaving the house to suit the convenience. What do you think is the best way to do it? Okay, just tell Peter I'm here. I'll just do the long bell. David, should I say what time I'm going to... at 2 minutes to 6, the ringing of the long bell? Will I wait till the... or do it now? Long bell, I probably do. Thank you, Jeremy. That's one of the best maiden speeches I've ever heard. Order. I remind honourable members that the valedictory speech of the Honourable John Hatzisteros is at 6 o'clock. In order to allow a little more time for John Hatzisteros' friends and family to arrive and assemble, I will now leave the chair and cause the bells to, a long bell to be rung at 2 minutes to 6.